Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Oliver, and I am the head of Archives and Special Collections here at Wilfrid Laurier University. Laurier Archives and Special Collections holds a vast collection of university records, special collections, and rare books, with collecting emphasis on the history of Wilfrid Laurier University, the environmental conservation movement in Canada, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada, Canadian music, and the history of Waterloo region. We are located on the first floor of the Laurier Library, and we are open to the public. Laurier Archives and Special Collections annually hosts a spring lecture on a topic connected to our holdings. Thank you so much for joining us today for our 2026 spring lecture. I would like to acknowledge that Wilfrid Laurier University and its campuses are located on the shared traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. This land is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. Acknowledging them reminds us of our important connection to the land where we live, learn, and work. We recognize, honor, and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which Laurier is now present. I encourage you to consider the traditional lands you are joining us from today. Before I introduce our moderator, I'd like to go over a few Zoom housekeeping items. You are muted and your video is turned off. I invite you to sit back and enjoy the event. Captions are enabled for this webinar. If you would benefit from captions, please click on the button with the CC icon along the bottom of your screen to enable this feature. We will be utilizing the Q&A function today. To ask a question, please click on the Q&A button along the bottom of your screen. We will be taking questions at the end of the panel, but please add questions via the Q&A button as they come to you. I would now like to introduce our moderator. Clara Rose is a second-year English student at Laurier, the lead reporter at The Cord, and the soon-to-be editor-in-chief of The Blueprint. Please join me in welcoming Clara.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. It's so lovely to see so many participants out today. It's always wonderful to see journalism still as a thriving thing that people are interested in, and we love to see you here so much. I'm joined today by four amazing panelists who have taken such great time to come out here and talk to us, giving us a look into the Cord from such a variety of different perspectives, from such a variety of different years, and a bunch of different times and circumstances. So we are so grateful to have everyone. I would first like to introduce Tony Burke. Tony Burke is a professor of early Christianity at York University. His traumatic and perhaps controversial experiences at the Cord during the tumultuous years of 1989 to 1991 led him to run screening from journalism, but he still writes. He specializes in apocryphal Christian literature, an interest that grew out of discussions of censorship with his friends and partners at the Cord. And Tony's published work includes Secret Scriptures Revealed, an introduction to Christian Apocrypha, and the three-volume series in New Testament Apocrypha, more non-canonical scriptures, and he currently lives in Kitchener, so he's local. Next up, I would love to introduce Wilbur McLean. Wilbur McLean worked at the Cord from 2000 to 2004 and served as the newspaper's editor-in-chief from 2003 to 2004. Wilbur's post-laureate career has taken him all across Canada. He has lived in Quebec, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario, working in both journalism and communication roles. Wilbur now works for the federal government's housing agency, CMHC, and lives in St. Catharines, Ontario, with his partner and three kids. Next up will be Shelby Blackley. Shelby Blackley is the manager and newsroom's SEO for The Athletic, co-founder of What the Fuck is SEO, and proud alum of the Cord from 2011 to 2016. Previously, she worked at Mashable, The Globe and Mail, and IndieGraph. Shelby has worked at journalism at major international corporations as both a reporter and audience development editor. She specializes in news SEO, user journeys, reader habits, and newsletters. When she's not thinking about search engine journalism, Shelby spends her time frolicking through the trees, weightlifting, or hanging out with her corgi puppy. Very cute. Yoshi. Shelby is currently located in Toronto, Canada. And finally, we'll talk about our last panelist, Kaitlyn Severin. Kaitlyn Severin is a marketing professional who specializes in social media and content creation, digital design, and video editing. She got her start at the Cord, where she worked from about 2013 to 2017 as a reporter and senior news editor, earning the Johnny Award for student journalism in the year 2017, which is a really big award for anyone interested. Since then, Kaitlyn has launched her own boutique marketing agency, bringing her creative expertise to a range of award-winning businesses from popular entertainment podcasters to international beauty franchise. So it's so nice to meet you all. As you can see, we have quite a bit of background, quite a bit of expertise, and obviously so many different career paths that have sprouted from this place of the chord, which is always so amazing to see. For our first question of the day, and I'll be asking each panelist to answer, the chord provides a window into the history of the university. Do you have a memorable story or experience from your time at the chord? And if we could please start with Tony Burke, that'd be great.
Okay, well, I tend to remember the the times I got in trouble more than anything else. We had, as my little bio said, it was a bit of a tumultuous year. Um, uh, I started at the Cord in '89 as the entertainment editor, and that year was a bad one for Laurier in the press. They Laurier was still doing panty raids as part of Frosh Week, and I think a lot of people were quite shocked at that, and it made it to the press. So Laurier was very concerned about its reputation, and we at the Cord didn't really like to play it all that nice with both the student union and the university. And well, because we did what we're supposed to do, right? Uh, you criticize, you investigate, and so on. And so they were on the lookout for us during this time to make sure we didn't embarrass the university further, or the university wouldn't get embarrassed further. And in the 89, 90 year, there were a few controversial things, but in my year, um, we we did the Cord's first gay and lesbian supplement. Um, Other university newspapers had done them for a little while. We hadn't done one before. And one of the things we included in it was a story on another newspaper getting shut down because they put in their gay and lesbian supplement um, an excerpt from a public health pamphlet called A Gay Men's Guide to Erotic Safer Sex. And so they got in trouble for that. So I did an interview with the press, with the paper, I can't remember which one it was, and we excerpted the same material. That university newspaper, they got in a bit of trouble, but they didn't get shut down. But we did. The university shut us down for a week, and then we came back on. It also was the same week that I got my wisdom teeth taken out. So I was appearing on CBC and other CTV and other news outlets with these great big yellow bruises on my mouth, trying to talk. So that was tumultuous for sure. We also in that year got sued for libel from a prof at in the psychology department, and I won't say more about that because I think I've already said enough. But it was hanging over us for as individuals for about 6 years before the prof finally dropped the lawsuit. So that was a bit stressful. But those are the two big ones, and I think they're. I can see you can probably see why I decided not to pursue journalism after all of that.
You mentioned that you still write though. Has your time at the Cord like influenced you as like a writer?
For sure. One thing that journalism is known for is its clarity, and like we don't write at in a we write at a certain level, right? I'm not sure what it's supposed to be, like grade six or something like that. And in the writing I do, I tend to aim for that same kind of clarity. A lot of scholarly academic writing can be fairly pretentious, and I aim not to do that. And I get complimented on it, though I also sometimes feel a little um, inadequate compared to some other writers who are much more highfalutin in their vocabulary. But I think that's a really important thing that you communicate for clarity, and I think being a student journalist taught me some of that for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'd like to pass the question over to Wilbur McLean now, if you'd like to answer about a memorable experience you had at the Cord.
Yeah, so it's not one particular time, but the through line to my court experience was always the production night. And I don't know if that was the case for everybody else, but it was like by early afternoon, everyone was kind of gathering to get ready for that long night. And then it was like this mixture of like super stressful, but a party vibe at the same time because we'd have like music playing and everyone's like chatting and eating, and but at the same time we know we have to get this thing done and we have to get it out the door. And then I remember on one occasion we worked through the night, and this was like 2003. The file sharing system, which was still kind of in its infancy, didn't work to get to the printer, so we had to like physically drive the file to Hamilton to get the paper out on time, and we still did. But those nights, when I think about my time at Laurier, I don't ever think about classes. I think about production nights. Like that was the thing that stood out so much to me, and still to this day I reflect on some of those moments. And so many of the people that I spent time with at Laurier were from those nights and then developed into larger friendships. So that I think that's my most memorable experience.
That's so special. Thank you so much for sharing that. Shelby, you worked for quite a few years at the Cord. How about you? Do you have any memorable experiences in such a long duration?
Too many years. I feel like I've been called out. Yeah, I was actually thinking about this when we were sent the questions, and there were two that came up, and obviously production nights were such a big special part of it, and you saw the iteration of it for those 5 years. Um, but there's two that came up for me when I was thinking this through. The first one was the IPRM thing and all of the differences. I believe it was like 2013 or 2014. IPRM was the resource management like revamp of all of the classes that the school was going through, and basically they wanted to cut like half the liberal arts. And I've never seen this school collaborate and come together in a way that they did during that time, that they just did not want to get rid of all the liberal arts classes and courses. And it was a very interesting time to cover from like a journalism perspective, because we also felt it. Like a lot of the people that worked at the Cord are all liberal arts or English or communications or all those. So we also had our personal bias in it. Um, and the school was a big part of it. I lied, I had three. The second one, which was a big part of my sports time, was the hazing scandal with the baseball team in 2012, 2023, 13. That was a big one. I saw that Dan Polishuk is on this call. Hi, Dan. And that was a big one during that time of just like having to navigate through all of that, having to, work with the athletics department. I'm still very good friends with a lot of people that work in the athletics department. So having to go into their offices and be like, hey guys, nice to see you. Hope you're having a great week, but also please tell me what the hell is going on, was a very fun time. And then the third one that I have to bring up is part of the reason why I am where I am, and got me my job at the Globe and Mail, was when we received a bomb threat through a 4chan in my final year as editor-in-chief. It was during reading week. Everyone was gone, but I had to run into the school and figure out what the hell was going on, and did a bunch of reporting. Ended up doing an interview with Kevin Crawley on the side of the road that I videotaped, and it ended up going on CBC and the Globe and Mail. And 3 months later, I was hired by the Globe and Mail, and that's basically how I got my entry into journalism. So, yeah, there were a lot of memorable times in that 5 years that were holy crap moments.
It's so interesting to see all these moments come from such a little university like Laurier. It really puts things into perspective how like much can happen on such a small campus. Lastly, I'd love to bring that question towards Kaitlyn Severin, if you have any memorable experiences during your time, almost equally long time at the Cord.
That's right. So Shelby and I actually worked together. She was my amazing EIC. So I do remember a lot of the times that she went through. That bomb threat was one of, yeah, now that you mention it, it's probably one of the craziest times we ever had at the Cord. But also jump on the production night bandwagon. I know we're going to talk about this later, but that was something when I think about my time at Laurier. I don't remember classes either. I just kind of remember production night, how chaotic it will be, just how fun it could be, how stressful, getting your stories in on time, making sure, is this newspaper actually going to go to the printer? That was a question I think we probably had every single week. Um, but yeah, that was something that was just, again, stands out in my mind. And all the conferences we went to, Nash was always just so much fun, going to Toronto, Ottawa. I also went to New Brunswick. It was just so much fun to meet people from across Canada, and to also, see guest speakers, panelists, just people you actually really looked up to in the industry. To be able to meet them in person was so motivational. And it was just, for me personally, so amazing just to kind of see them, and talk about where they came from and how they kind of got so far in the industries they were in. And also camp was also really fun. It was something we did at the beginning of the year to kind of connect with everybody on your in your section, on your team, and to kind of talk about what type of paper you wanted to make through the year. So a lot of just a batch of memories just kind of come up when I hear this question.
Thank you so much for mentioning Nash. That actually perfectly leads into my next question, so I appreciate that. For the second question of the seminar, in your own experience, what is the role of student journalism on campus? If you'd like to start out that with Tony, but anyone who feels like they'd like to speak also as well.
Okay. Well, I mentioned already that we saw our role as writers to hold the university administration and student union administration accountable for things that they were doing. But you always have to kind of walk a fine line between doing that and then not alienating those people when you actually do need them for comments on other things, right? And we were, I don't know where everybody else is, but when we were in the student center and the student union was just down the hall, and we would sometimes hang out with those people, and then you'd have to turn around and write something that could get somebody into some relatively minor trouble, but still trouble. So it's a weird balancing act to do that, but it's still, you have to push through it and do that regardless. There's also a sense that you should be responsible to the community to do some promotion for things. Though you never want to end up being just like a newsletter. You don't want, I think people would expect that they could send you a press release and then you would just print it. And it's not really the way it goes. You write a story. Sometimes you might find different angles and so on. So yeah, you need to have that kind of a balance of supporting the community, but also, investigating the community. I remember one particular time we our news segment when I was editor in chief, our news department was a bit weak at times, and our news editor kind of went a bit AWOL. He had some relationship issues and so on, and our lead story in that issue was on a faculty craft sale. Like that's some hard hitting news there. And it was quite embarrassing, and we all kind of complained about it at the meeting of that week. But that's where the balance tipped, I think, where yes, it was a story, but really there's not many angles you can make to a craft sale. And you become really proud of those moments where you do something that's more investigative, like a bomb threat or something like that. I wish we had something more like that in our day. Certainly we did have some things, but nothing quite so explosive, you might say.
Thank you so much. How about you, Wilbur? Do you have anything to say about the role of student journalism on campus?
Yeah, I think as the name implies, it's that student perspective. So there's so much like it's easy to get official information that's been like properly vetted through the right channels to get the information about what's happening on a campus like Laurier. But when you have student journalism, it takes itself seriously. We always took ourselves seriously, but we had a lot of fun doing it. And so then we took that role of this is the perspective of students at Laurier instead of the adults, right? The the staff, the board of governors, et cetera. And so it was always so rewarding when we would produce a newspaper and there would be some big story. And the next day, when it was published and distributed, you would see so many people around campus, both staff and students, reading that and say they're understanding the student perspective of whatever this might be, which is so different from the official news release or what was coming out of the comms department or whatever was coming out of the president's office. And so to me, that's the value of student journalism is it's easy for an institution as big as a university to forget that the student voice matters. And that was the role to me of the court is that, hey, students matter, our opinion matters, and this is our perspective, and this is our reporting on what's happening on campus.
Absolutely. How did it make you feel to see so many people engaging with the content that you had like purposely like published?
Oh, it was like, I've never done drugs, but I think that would be what like drugs would feel like. Like it was just like this rush to see like you'd be in like I forget all the terminology, like where all the restaurants were on campus in the student center. And I would just be like seeing all these people reading the paper. And I was like, oh, this is so great. It's like, and like, you'd sit there and they don't know who you are necessarily, but you can see what they're reading. You want to know like what they're taking in. But like, it was such a rush to me. That's the thing I enjoyed the most.
Thank you so much. How about you, Shelby? What do you think is the role of student journalism on campus?
I cannot stop laughing at that comment. That was amazing. But there was something that you said in there of just like having the people like having that student perspective was so important, and I think that's the through line of student journalism because Laurier is not big, but it has a ton of secrets, and there's a ton that was going on, and there's a ton that people are working on, and a lot of it isn't told to students in the right way. So, student journalism gives you that perspective of like, well, how does this actually matter to me? Like, I remember with IPRM, it seemed like this really top level, boring thing until we really started reading the documents and realizing that they wanted to chop like half of the arts courses. And these were courses that like my friends were taking, or, people that were in these courses came to Laurier for. And it was us being able to kind of like ascertain that this was something that was going to impact a very large number of students that pay a lot of dollars to go to Laurier. And it was that moment that we started seeing students, come up to us and be like, hey, like we have problems with IPRM. We want to talk to you. The Walusu board of directors hated that we were covering this so diligently, but then they were starting to come to us. And it was this really amazing moment of just seeing kind of why student journalism is so important. And I'm not sure if Kaitlyn's going to bring this up, but when we were talking about statues a couple years later, like people were going nuts about the statues and whether or not they should stay on campus and whether or not Laurier should still be even named Laurier. Like there were all these things that you start seeing students have such big perspectives of that students themselves are in such a good place to give a perspective on that, like Wilbur said, like the adults can't give that perspective in the same way because they have their own vested interests.
When you look back on it, do you feel like very much like the journalism really did influence a lot of the life that happened on campus?
Yes. Yes. I think that there were a lot of things that happened in those 5+ years, and even before I was there, that teams before me would be like, hey, we've gone through this before. This is cyclical. These are things that are coming up regularly that people looked to the media for. It's a little bit different this year, and I really empathize with the teams that are part of the LUCIP for what it's worth. And full disclosure, I am on the board of a LUCIP. But it's a very different world because, it's so much more digital first, and the print edition isn't going out as regularly. Whereas in our world, it was going out weekly, and we were able to jump on a lot of these things and kind of give that perspective. And I think that having that really dictated a lot of the movement. Like IPRM conversations were happening the way they were because of the courts coverage, because of the WLUCIP coverage, and because students were getting involved, and the students had that perspective from us.
Very good. How about your view on all of this, Kaitlyn?
This is a really good question. This is a really amazing conversation as well. I'll have to agree with Wilbur again. Like, just, I don't know. I think the experience of it was also taking ourselves seriously. I think it was a great quote to kind of jump on because we did take these stories so seriously. And I think some people might look in if they weren't a part of a loose up or the court and think like, why do they care so much? Why do they want to get these resources? Why do they want to put out the newspaper every single, Wednesday, Tuesday? But to us, it really mattered. It really mattered getting those stories out to students. To me, I really also wanted to, get professors, administration, people outside in Waterloo, outside of Waterloo, to kind of get a glimpse of Laurier life and see, oh, these students aren't just studying. They're not just, partying, being students. Like, they're activating. They're, you're promoting events. They're doing all these amazing things, right? So, I just wanted to show, at least in my role as, a student journalist, was that, we matter, these issues matter. And it was just, it's just who we are and it's who we're trying to be. And yeah, and I just was kind of writing down some notes while everyone was talking because I realized when I was writing these stories, I think my goal used to be, what, these students, again, they're studying, there's exams coming up, but when they're reading the core, they should realize, why should this matter? Why should like this event matter? Why should this story matter? Why should I really take part in these debates? Why should I care about a student election? And I think that was kind of our job. And it was kind of our role to make students realize they should care about it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Do you think your passion played a role in how like the stories came out and how like people like received them?
Yeah, I think so. I'm very passionate about law stories. I didn't think I would be. I think going into, especially my first year at Laurier, I did hear about student elections, for example, and I was like, okay, that's great, but why should I care? I'm not a part of these student elections. But then once I started reporting on it, I remember with Shelby and a lot of our close friends, that's when I realized how important it was and how really involved, students can really get in these politics. And, I think it was just, again, something that was so important that we thought all students should get involved in, even if, again, they weren't a part of the students' union or anything like that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That leads me to my third question for the afternoon. Journalism is an industry that is rapidly changing. How does your own experience at the court affect your perception of the media in its current state? What kind of things have changed? What kind of things have stayed the same? If you'd like to start us off, Tony.
Sure. I married a former journalist. She used to work at the Stratford Free Press. Stratford Free Press, Stratford Beacon something or other. I'll get in trouble later for not getting that right. And so we often discuss journalism together, more because of her coming out of that than anything. But I have a bit of perspective. I know a little bit about these things. So we often discuss the state of the media and misconceptions people have of it. As I came to the end of my stay at the court, I started to be much more interested in production than news. Um, so when I think about media now, it's got nothing to do with production, but I think about the survival of media and about working with new platforms and so on. So I really like the idea of small independent media, like say the West End Phoenix in Toronto or something like that, where people are actually trying new ways to get news across to people. Another thing that my wife and I often discuss is the corporate takeover of sorts of media, like with big groups like Sun Media. Her newspaper was purchased by them and basically run into the ground, whereas it could have survived as an independent paper because they knew what they were doing, but they were just their resources were taken and used elsewhere for the larger corporation. So those are the kinds of things that we tend to think about. We talk about around the house is the current state of delivery of news and the decline in the trustworthiness of media by the general population.
Did your experience with the student union during the time that conflict, like, does that give you any insight to like how flawed journalism can sometimes be?
How flawed it can be? Um, I think journalists are not particularly flawed. I think
I mean,
publishers more than anything else, right? What the owners of the newspapers are trying to do, rather than the people on the ground who I've continue to have a lot of respect for.
absolutely. How about you, Wilfred?
Yeah, for me, it from what I see, the traditional, print media especially is like in a steady state of decline, which I find sad because there's more of an emphasis now on people kind of like self-producing little news stories, short, bite-sized media, that sort of thing. But what I think is being lost is some of like the stories that have been referenced here, where you have people who are dedicated to digging deep, talking to the right people, checking your sources. That deep journalism, I think some of that's being lost. And I don't know what it's like at Laurier anymore. I don't know, how influential the court remains, but I think in general, print journalism especially, it's losing its impact. It's losing some of its influence, which is unfortunate because of how strong journalism is in terms of being able to impact a community, whether at Laurier or community at large, and impact people's perception of things. So I do find like sometimes now you hear about communities that don't have any newspaper at all or don't have a local radio station. So there isn't that locally produced um, situation. And how many things would be missed if the cord wasn't in existence? How many stories would be missed or would have been underreported or unreported, or things that, scandals that wouldn't have been exposed over the years that should have been exposed? So I think that's kind of like my perspective on the state of media today versus, say, in my 25 years ago in my case.
Absolutely. And that leads me on to Shelby. How do you feel?
So I still work in media, and it's been interesting to just like see the differences even over the last 10 years since leaving Laurier and the Cord. My year of EIC manship was 2025, 2020, nope, 2015, 2016. And right after that, I went into the Globe and Mail. Globe and Mail at that point was still pretty predominantly print focused, but with a digital entity. um, paywalled at the time as well, which is not normal at that time. And then when I left, I did a bunch of digital products. I worked at IndieGraph, which is a agency that helps local news. Back to what Wilbur was saying, like local news is one of those places that's been really hit in the last couple of years, and something that has been independent media in particular, a really big facet of what's been trying to kind of come back since those years. And during that time, I took an extra step back to kind of recognize like the state of the industry and just how much it has changed, because it is very creator led. It is very multimodal. We need to think about all the different places that people are getting their news and their information. And it is very oversaturated, which is extremely hard to catch people's attention and extremely hard for people to get the news that they need. Like, we used to be able to read an entire story either through print or text or whatever, and now it's not necessarily the same. But one of the things that I do think is the through line and what has stayed the same is the need and the value of information that is still removed from the corporate world. And by that, I mean, what is that perspective that you need to know about? What is going to fill those information gaps that you need to know to live your best life, to be smart, to be valuable, to be able to, navigate the world that we live in? That is still valuable information. But the way in which we get it has changed a lot. And the media industry, depending on where you are and also geographically where you are, in the US, there's a little bit more movement forward in terms of how they're grappling with these multimodal aspects, where Canada falls behind a little bit. And so it's this very interesting thing over the last 10 years of seeing just how journalism is still a very important thing. We still need the news, we still need to be able to know what's going on in the world, but the way in which we get it has very much changed.
Absolutely. And I agree with you 100% that there is such value in like being able to access this kind of material and stay aware of what's going on, especially in your local area. So, Kaitlyn, I'll leave the last question to you.
Thanks. So I don't really work in journalism anymore. I started working primarily in marketing and social media marketing, I want to say about 6 or 7 years ago. So I am constantly, even for myself, for my clients, doom scrolling. I am seeing, false news stories everywhere, which I know has been a big, big problem probably since we were at the Cord. But I think it's just gotten probably 10 times worse. And you see it, and not just on Facebook. I know people target that, but you see it on Instagram, obviously you see it on X, you see it on TikTok too. And I think it's getting increasingly difficult to find the real stories and the real facts. And I know that Shelby also mentioned too, now I feel like, people are reading, just the headlines, or they're reading, certain parts of a story and totally forgetting about the rest and kind of going off on those facts as well. So it's becoming, and I fall into these traps as well. So I think it's just becoming increasingly difficult to really validate sources, to really look at a story and think, is this legit? Is this valid? It's really hard to tell. But I will say, working at the Cord kind of gave me the skills, and I'm a communications major as well. So this also helped me kind of look at a story, kind of take it to a step back, actually, I should say, from reading a story and say, okay, what are these people or this reporter trying to say? Who's the new news outlet? Is this a biased story? Is this unbiased? Um, just kind of question the actual reporting itself rather than going with the facts, or I guess the stats are trying to say. So, that's something I still try to do, a practice I do now. Again, it's becoming increasingly hard, so I fall into the traps before. And other people do as well. So it's very depressing, but I will say, I see on TikTok and even Instagram as well, people are still trying to break through that noise and, have the facts ready to go and try to, get people to pay attention, which I know is very hard to do nowadays. But thankfully, more and more people are starting to do it.
Absolutely. For my next question, I want to give all of you a little bit of a chance to talk about yourself more in the present. So, how did your work at the Cord train or influence you for your career? Starting with Tony, please.
I mentioned this a little bit already. Well, I mentioned about writing with clarity, because I do continue to write, but also it was because of discussions at the court about censorship and such that led me to an interest in studying what I study, which is apocryphal Christian literature, which is all the Gospels and all that other stuff that didn't make it to the Bible. Uh, so I think without the cord and without those interests, I don't think I would have moved into that particular area of study. And it's I've done all right by it. I've got a nice teaching career and publishing career as a result. And my very first was it my first book? I guess so. Where I did discuss at the end of it what led me to studying what I study, and I did name check the cord and student journalism and all of that that fed into that interest. Yeah, that's about as much as I can say.
Absolutely. It's so interesting to see how your writing is influenced as well. That's so impressive. Wilbur, you mentioned that the Cord had like you go traveling places all across with Canada. Could you tell me how it influenced your career as well? Also, you're muted. Sorry.
For a few years after the cord, I did pursue journalism, then switched to communications. I work in housing now for the federal government, which sounds like a complete leap, but it's not. The cord work directly influences my day-to-day work now. So, a group wants to apply for funding through the federal government to build affordable housing. So I don't know much about housing, but I know the right people to talk to. So I take information I don't necessarily understand, synthesize it and explain it to people who are trying to understand it. So it's the same thing I'm doing, just in a different capacity. So if I didn't have that background in journalism with the cord, I probably wouldn't be able to do my job well now. So it's not like an obvious thing that's connected, but it's directly connected every day of my career.
Absolutely, and it's the skills you get along the way that like influence. Obviously, Shelby, you're still in the world of journalism very much. So if you could tell me a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, I'm gonna take two different responses to this because I think that while obviously there's all of the stuff that I learned while being part of the court and being part of Elucip and all of that in terms of being where I am now, like that was one part of it for sure, all of the technical and hard skills. But the biggest thing that I really learned was um, in the management side of things. As an editor-in-chief, you manage 20 plus people at times, depending on how big your team is. Mine was 24. Um, and during that time, you handle a lot of different people. You handle a lot of really amazing students that are at different parts of their careers at school, different backgrounds, different majors, different goals. Like Kaitlyn always wanted to go into media and marketing, but there were other people on the team that wanted to go into business, and there were other people that wanted to go completely out of journalism and were focused on their co-ops. And during that time, you really learn one, prioritization, but two, just like the value of building people up and building a team and finding people that work together and the success of them. And I was personally very successful because I'm crazy, but also there's the journalism side of it. But the team being able to support you and being able to learn how to handle and manage so many different people and build their superpowers is one of the things that's translated almost one to one to what I'm doing now. I manage a team of five. They're amazing. They are all so different across the entire United States. One's in California, one's in DC, one's in North Carolina, but they all build out their skill set. And I think that that's something at the cord that I got thrown into. I always had to manage teams, big teams. I was the sports editor for 2 years. I was campus news editor for a year. But the management of the teams, the time management, all those soft skills that bring are with the cord when you're a full-time student, managing all of this, those are what actually I think set me up better now than even any of the technical skills of reporting or anything. Those almost feel like secondhand to everything that I learned as being part of the editorial board.
Absolutely, it's incredibly inspiring to hear all that from where you came from. How did Kaitlyn, how did the Cord perhaps influence you opening your own agency?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I will say, once I graduated, again, I majored in communication studies, but I will say almost every job interview I went to after graduation, the interviewer did not really care or give a crap about my major. They actually, when I let them know I worked for the Core Workspace, great student journalism newspaper, they wanted to see the articles. They were so interested in the stories I was reporting. So I, that in itself was amazing to kind of see how interested, companies were because they knew the skills I probably developed while working at the Cord would help, in whatever role I would end up getting. So I ended up working, I guess, becoming self-employed about 5 years ago during COVID. I had a couple of full-time jobs before that. And I will say it really did help me prepare myself for everything that was to come. If you've been a freelancer, self-employed, you know how difficult it can be to get contacts, to get references, especially you're starting at square one. But I will say, just coming from my skills as a reporter, as someone who had to go into production, I manage a team of at least two reporters as well as Shelby in my section. Being able to design the newspaper, speak with contacts, speak with, sources and photographers and, editors and designers. It was something I was just able to kind of take in and know how to talk to people and know if I wanted certain types of information, I'd go to this person or this team. So it was really valuable in the way at least I ran my business. And just getting all those skills, I was able not just to develop my skills in writing, but as well as photography and social media design and content creation, and everything like that. So it really did help me out a lot. And I'm always just so grateful for the time I had at the Cord and everything they gave me.
Absolutely. It must have been so cool to be able to show all your stories to people in interviews as well and like actually get to use them in like real life settings. That's so cool. My next question pertains a little bit more to people like me who work at the Cord currently. Do you have any advice for the Cord's 2026 to 2027 editorial board? If we'd like to start with Tony, of course, I apologize.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you wanted to go with everyone. One of the things I think I learned from my experience, well, it's a kind of a cautionary tale, is the need to sometimes go slow and check to see if what you're doing could end up causing some trouble down the line. This is something I do still a little bit in my life now. I tend to have this assumption. This is because we're in these bubbles that my perspective is a perspective that's shared by everybody, which is a bit more, kind of a progressive perspective, which many of us in the arts have. And then you can get really surprised when what you're doing that you think is good, a good thing, bashes up against some very conservative values. And that, of course, led to trouble for me in my years. So sometimes it's good to kind of slow down and see how what you're doing could affect other people. I also want to echo something like a few people have said already, is about how important you think what you're doing is at the time. It's as if what you're doing is earth-shattering, and once you're a year out of the being EIC, you realize how replaceable you were, how the next person is on, the next group is on to the next thing, and you're in the past. And both of those are exactly right. While you're doing this job, do think it's the most important thing in the world. Work really hard at it and try to make a difference and all those other things. But it's also good to try and keep in perspective that it is transitory, and you shouldn't really try not to worry too much about things that nothing. Like, my period was a time of great stress for not just for me, but for the other people on the editorial board. And maybe if we had a thought at that time too that this too will pass, another team will come after us, and as important as these things are, we're just a blip in the history of this organization.
Was that a lesson you would say you learned pretty like early on when you like left the Cord, or was that something that like took you a couple of years of reflecting to realize?
That I'm forgettable?
No, that like the cycle of journalism, I mean.
I don't know how soon. Like, I was a bit still involved after I'd left, because of the connections I'd made with people. So I would hang around with the new people because they were my people as well. And so I kind of had this time period of easing my way out of the environment. I also worked at Laurier for a few years as well, so I would always pop over and say hello and stuff. It may have taken a bit of time for that to sink in, but yeah, I just think it's a good idea to think about it while you're also there, so that you don't get don't let the stress get to be too much for you.
Absolutely. Thank you. How about you, Wilbur? What advice would you have for us?
Building on what Tony said, enjoy it in the moment, even the times when you're super stressed and you don't know how you're going to get through this. It's really difficult in that moment, but try to enjoy it because those are the times you're going to remember decades from now. The times I remember now aren't like the easy weeks where it was like, oh, this is good stuff. It's the really stressful ones where you really had to band together with your crew and really had to work hard to get things out the door and deal with all the stressors and external like factors that are coming in. But those are the things that I remember most, that I most value in my time at the Cord, was the really difficult ones. So even though it's hard now, remember them, try to enjoy them. That's my only advice.
Do you have, and I'll ask this to Shelby as well, but do you have any specific advice for like the EIC perspective from like the editor-in-chief role?
Do you want me to answer this one, or does
Either one
anyone?
of you, if Wilbur has anything you'd like to say about that as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, do you want to go, Wilbur?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
Um, well, okay, so overall for the Cord, things have changed a lot. I know, especially in the last 5 to 6 years, production's very different. Enjoy it. And remember that you are the newspaper on campus that is able to report on everything that happens on campus. I think it sometimes can be intimidating to feel like you're just this newspaper. You still are important. You still have value. You still should walk into the room and say, I am a reporter for the Cord. And you should realize that notoriety and what that means and be able to report fearlessly. I think it's extremely important for this year's group, especially. There's going to be a lot of changes to the SAC fees and whatnot. There's so much opportunity, and I think that you are very well equipped, knowing what the board is looking like too, and having Curtis at the helm. You guys are very well equipped to handle it, and I'm very excited, and I want you to run fearlessly into that. And then on the other side of it, have so much fun. It's so true that we take ourselves way too seriously. Like, you asked the question about how quick did you turn around and realize how replaceable you are? Literally the same day I walked out of the building. Like, the same day, the person that took over for me, God bless her, Beth Bowles, she took over, she ran with it, and she did exactly what she should have done because it was her time to run. But you realize how quickly your time is over, and that's both a really great thing, but a really fleeting thing. And so you need to really enjoy it while you're sitting there because holy crap, did 5 years fly by.
Thank you so much. How about you, Kaitlyn?
Um, I will say, when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking, okay, what would I tell my younger self? And I think I would tell her, you're gonna make a lot of mistakes and it's gonna suck. You're gonna have a spelling error here, grammatical error there. You might spell someone's name wrong a couple of times because you're so tired. It's 2 a.m. on production night. You're just exhausted. You've read, it seems like a million stories at this point. And something is just going to go right under you and right into print and right into the digital format. And it's just going to be out there for everyone to read the next day. And that person is going to get angry at you. And I don't think I was the only one this happened to. Again, it happens to the best of us, happens to the best of journalists as well. Just know it's totally fine. If you can go and learn from it, then amazing. But, if this is something that people are struggling with, accidents happen, especially on the 2026 to 2027 editorial board, just know it happens. Please don't give up. You're doing an amazing job. And please have fun with it. That's just something I would tell myself. Um, and yeah, just know like the work is really, really hard. I know it's so difficult. Sometimes the source doesn't want to talk to you. Sometimes people get upset with what you've written. But just know this work is really, really rewarding. And at the end of the day, you're going to learn just so much from it. You're going to make great friends. You're going to make great contacts. Um, and then, sorry, a third piece of advice is try to do everything yourself. I kind of think about, if I was on the board today, what would I kind of do to make my life a little easier? Because, I feel like every week I was transcribing interviews myself listening to them, writing everything on my own, editing. Obviously, I had help from everybody, but there was no chat GPT or anything like that. AI was such a new thing. Um, so I would, and I know obviously this is a resource everyone has today, but I would really suggest taking a step back and trying to do it all yourself. It might take more time, but that's where you develop the skills that you will need for your future career and whatever field you decide to go into.
Thank you so much. This is all very encouraging to hear from such a wild variety of perspectives. So I really appreciate you guys for answering that one. For my last question of the day, looking ahead, what do you guys think are your hopes for the next 100 years of the Corps? Now that we've completely finished this first 100 years, what are we looking for in the future? You'd like to say anything, Tony?
Uh, I'm not. I'm further out than the rest of the panel on my life at the court and what student journalism is all about these days. So I'm going to defer to the other panelists on this one.
Absolutely. Then if Wilbur, you'd like to take the mantle.
Yeah, in that in what some iteration it still exists, it's still doing the same things that will likely look very different than does now and what it looked like in my time or Tony's time, but that there's still the cord and it's still important. That is what I hope is for the next 100 years of the cord.
Absolutely. How about you, Shelby?
Yeah, that's very much the same. Like still there, still active, still covering the school in the way that it needs to, adapting to whatever happens. And because it's got the support of Elucip as a whole, I think just making sure that student publications are still a part of the Laurier culture.
Amazing. Well, then if you'd like to close us off with your final answer, Kaitlyn.
Yeah, I'll agree with Wilbur and Shelley. That's an amazing answer. Also just say just giving opportunities to students, whether they want to get into journalism, get into business, whatever field they want to get into. I hope it continues to give students the skills they need to succeed in that field. And I just hope in the next 100 years, I'll see more former Cordies reporting on the news, whether it's on TV, on social media, in newspapers. I hope to see them in the boardrooms, on podcasts. I just want to see more out there, and using the skills they developed at the core to, connect with audiences in meaningful ways and still continue to practice authentic journalism.
Absolutely, and student journalism is the best way to get yourself right into the field right out of college. Amazing. Well, that is all the official questions I have for today. Thank you so much for all the panelists. I really, really appreciate you guys for taking the time to come out and answer all these questions so amazingly as you've done. Now we're going to move on to the Q&A section. So I'm just going to open this tab and I'm going to read them out. And unless they're specifically mentioned to a person, feel free to turn off your mics, like turn on your mics and answer them like however you'd like. So for my first question from Peter, is there a story/stories you regret not pursuing or wish that you could have published that you didn't?
I am so glad someone asked this question because there is one that to this day still bothers me. So up until through the 2000s, there were still no athletic scholarships in Ontario and university. It's only later on that they allowed them. And we had heard from multiple people that this is only ever a rumor. I know this is being recorded. We never found out this happened. So that athletics was offering soft scholarships by giving some key student athletes jobs that would be like they would turn the lights on in a building in the morning and then turn the lights off at night, and then they would get paid for a full day of work. And so we heard this from a couple of people and we looked into it, but never were able to verify it. So to this day, I think about whether that was actually happening or not. So that has always bothered me. So I'm so glad someone asked this question.
Anyone else of our panelists feel like answering? All right, so for our next question from Bryn, I am old. How is the court adapting content to different social media platforms and formats? Shelby, if you're still on the like if you're you would like to answer that one?
Yeah, I was gonna say this is a really good question for the team that's currently on it because I mostly only see the board, but I do know that in at least 2016, 17, we started moving towards Instagram. I know that they created a TikTok in the last couple of years. I don't know quite how much they've done with it. Um, they did move away from predominantly print, so now they do one print issue and mostly digital. But Clara, you actually might be the most in tune to answer this.
Absolutely. So we do have an online website which you can find for just searching up the chord .com. It's fairly easy to find. And we do a monthly print which can be found on campus. And yeah, it's pretty accessible to find. We publish all of our stories on the month on like our social media and on like our Instagram. You can like get the link through there easily or also just directly on the website. Thank you for asking. We appreciate your interest. From Sophia, can you speak about the relationships you developed during your time at the Cord? Are you still connected with the people on your team? Obviously, Shelby and Kaitlyn are here. If anyone would like to answer that one about the relationships.
I'll take that one because my best friend who met her husband is on her honeymoon right now from the Cord. My best friend Ashley Denuzzo and myself met through the Cord in 2011. We were both sports writers underneath at the time Kevin Campbell, and one of our friends that was also part of the sports team, Shane McKay, was with us. And Shane and Ashley got married in October of 2025 after being friends for a very long time, meeting through the Cord, and I was the maid of honor at their wedding. And that's just one of many, 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 many that I could run through. There have been so many relationships, both platonic and romantic, that have come out of the Cord and Woluwe. Bryn Ossington, who was the executive director way back when, he left in 2015. Him and I are still close. I got to see him last month. Some of my closest friends are still really, really, really big parts of my life from the Cord. And also just like beyond just the friendship part of it and that, the network was a really big part of it. I met a lot of people that are both at Laurier but expanded. The SID, Sports Information Director, Jamie Howison, is now out in BC, but him and I still talk. Um, there have been so many people that have helped me along the way get my job. Shannon Busta, who is a Cord alum, was the reason that I got my interview at the Globe and Mail. So there's just been so many people along the way that I've met and networked with that like I say this all the time that the Cord was like one of my first loves and the reason I'm where I am, but it truly is the reason I am where I am.
How about you, Tony? Would you like to answer that question as well?
Uh, sure. Well, I married one of the people on our editorial board, but we're divorced now, so not quite in contact in quite the same way. My brother is also on our staff, so I see him still. But over the years, less and less for most people. A few people I still see on Facebook, but I don't think I've gotten together with anyone in quite some time. And that's a natural thing. Everyone moves away from one another, and back then, of course, when we were just finishing up in '92 or so, we didn't have the opportunity to be able to keep in contact electronically like people do today. So we can do it later on when you've forgotten half forgotten who people are. But yeah, it's so think about that question. It did make me a little melancholy thinking about the fact that I haven't been in contact with a lot of people since. So it's too bad. But just looking at the Q&A chat there, I see Chris Starkey's name, and he a few people down. He was the editor when I was entertainment editor, I think. So it's actually kind of funny to see his name pop up there. So hi, Chris.
And I noticed you have your hand raised as well, Wilbur. Would you like anything to add?
Yeah, I've seen so many names of people who are attending this webinar, people that I used to work with at the Cord who I haven't talked to in years. So it's been like so nice to just see people I knew. Yeah, so some of the most important friendships in my life are still like people from 20, 25 years ago from the Cord, Carly, Blair, Dan. And I say important because like Tony references, life kind of like takes you away. So they're not people I will like talk to every day or see that often, but at really important moments of my life, I find like they're the people that I will refer to, I will like meet up with, if I really want to like connect with them over something. So I will always value those friendships. And I think those are like lifelong friendships. I think I will never not be friends with those people. And it's through the Cord that I have those relationships. And I'm so grateful for that.
100%. I think you're all going to like this next question because you all mentioned like your production nights. Cindy asked, can you describe what the newsroom was like on an average production night for your team? If anyone wants to take the floor.
Chaotic. It was like well, for me personally, it depended on the stories that we were putting out because sometimes you go in, you're like, this field, all my stories are done, all of my reporter stories are done. this might be a good night. Maybe we can get out by 11 o'clock. And those are always the nights where something happens at 7, 8 o'clock, and then we're there till 4 a.m. And then that's a night that's like, are we going to make it in time? Is the paper going to be ready? So yeah, it really just depended on, for me anyways, like, is this a story that I think by tomorrow people are going to read and I'll get angry emails about, or is it just going to be like a casual, good addition? People are going to read it, get the information they need, and move on. But it was just so much fun, I will say. Like those nights were the ones I do remember, just hanging out with everyone. That's where you got close to everyone on a personal and professional level. It's also kind of where you saw everyone, at least I know for myself, my best and my worst. But I think in the end, that's what created such an amazing newspaper, and that's what got people, to connect so well with each other.
Absolutely. How about you, Tony? I noticed you have your hand raised.
Yeah, we the year I was EAC, we had this great advertising department who sold so many ads, which meant we had to write so much copy in order to fill those non-ad pages. And so it was a rather large paper, and it meant that we never got out of there before dawn. Every week was the same. And you always feel like maybe this time it'll be better, but it never was. It was just such a large amount of work. And these were the days too before desktop publishing. So we actually had to, print out our stories, put them through a wax glue machine, and then slap them on boards. We had line tape to do borders on pictures and everything. So you'd go home with wax burns and pieces of tape stuck to your leg and stuff like that. But it as they said, it was a lot of fun. It was like soldiers in a bunker, right? You share this experience, and it's hard. But it's enjoyable, and things get goofy around 2 o'clock in the morning. Um, um, I also remember writing a test right after production night. So I had like an 8:30 a.m. class, and I thought I did terrible on it because I was falling asleep writing, and so I was dreading getting it back. And I got it back, and it was really good. I did really well. I couldn't recognize anything that I wrote in it. I don't remember ever having those thoughts. Um, but strange things happen when you're sleep deprived. And just a year or two after I had finished, when more desktop publishing was coming in and it became easy to do all this work, the EIC at the time boasted how they were always out before midnight. And I thought, well, that's great in a sense, but it also you are missing that camaraderie that comes with those late night events. So yeah, certainly difficult, stressful, hard to do, but that's where all the fun really was. And so when we did production night Tuesday, so into Wednesday, and then you try to sleep for a couple of days before the cycle starts up again. But it's peaks and valleys all the time in the production schedule of the paper.
So cool to see what has changed and what hasn't changed as we've moved to more of like obviously using technology and media and platforms like InDesign to create things rather than doing it by hand. That's so interesting to see. Would anyone else like to answer this question before I ask another one? Perfect. Sophia asks, what motivated you to join the Cord? Do you remember your first article? Let's go with Shelby first. Oh, so many hands. This is great.
Well, I'll try to go fast. Yes, I do remember my first article. It was a women's soccer story for the sports section. It was just a gamer. Funny enough, actually came to Laurier for the Cord. I always wanted to be a journalist when I was a kid, and I was like, I want to write. And so I was originally going to go to Carleton, but then my mom was like, are you sure you want to pigeonhole yourself into journalism? So I had an 18-year-old crisis and decided that I was going to apply to Laurier, Brock, and Guelph. Realized Laurier had a student newspaper that was pretty good at the time. Decided to go there, applied in a week, and the rest was history. But I do remember that like first article and the like really, really exciting moment that was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, like my stuff's in print. That was like an overwhelming feeling at the time, and I just wanted to keep feeling that feeling. And then by the beginning of my first year as sports editor, the entire sports section was me because it was the summer, and I regretted feeling that ever.
How about you, Kaitlyn? You had your hand raised before I saw.
Yeah, so now that question actually just sparked a memory that I've totally forgotten about, and it's kind of an embarrassing memory too. So I joined the Cord because growing up, I really wanted to be a reporter. I really wanted to get into journalism. And during my frosh week at Laurier, I remember seeing on a pole a piece of paper to volunteer as a writer for the Cord. So the fact I didn't see that on my phone digitally, I think is amazing in itself. Um, and so I ended up going into the news section, and my editor, I believe, was Marissa Evans at the time, who was an amazing, amazing reporter and editor. Um, and she told my first story I'd be interviewing the student president at the time. I believe her name is Annie, but I'm so sorry I can't remember her last name. She was such a delight. I was very, very unprepared for this. I knew what the questions I was going to ask. I knew what we were going to talk about, but I didn't think I should come in with a recording app, with a recorder. I'm just going to write down every single thing she's going to say. I'm a fast writer. I was not a fast writer. She pretty much laughed at me trying to keep up with everything she said, but she was, again, such a delight. She ended up taking her phone out and saying, I'm going to record it and I'll send it to you. So I never made that mistake again. But writing it, I think it took me about 2 days, and it was probably a 300 word story as well. So looking back, I just can't believe how unprepared I was. But to go from that to, where we all got to 4 years later, it was pretty amazing to see and to think about.
Absolutely. Would either Tony or Wilbur like to answer this question as well?
Yeah, I will. So I remember, I don't know if this is still the case, a copy of the cord used to be part of the package that students would get as they were going, if they got accepted into Laurier. Did they still do that?
I don't believe so, though I don't
Okay.
remember so much of my out week.
Y- You'd get this whole like, so it's like before you even arrived at the school, it would be like the summer before, you would get this huge package in the mail, had all this information about going to Laurier, and then it had one copy of the cord that was made specifically for that package, if I remember correctly. I remember reading that thing start to finish and deciding I wanted to work for this newspaper. So my first week on campus, I went and applied, and there was like 15 different positions, like distribution, um, production assistant, like every single thing, advertising assistant. I applied to every single one in hopes that I would get anything, and then I got hired to do sports. And so my first article was uh, covering a men's soccer game. So, but I just remember that moment of like deciding I'm going to get in with this newspaper and being willing to do absolutely anything just to get in. And then the rest is history, I guess.
That's such a good story. Also, Tony, if you'd like to say anything.
Sure. Like I said, I started with an entertainment, so my first few pieces were just things like album reviews, which are not particularly interesting. But the one that I felt that I'd learned something from is there was the station still around, CFNY 102.1 The Edge. They were doing some programming changes, and there was a local person who did a jazz show late at night, and he was getting let go of because they wanted to change the format. And so I did an interview with him about his experience and how he felt about these changes. And then I brought it to the editor, and we had a conversation about, well, this is great, but you need to get multiple perspectives. So now you're going to have to call the CFNY management and get some comments from them. And doing that, I realized how journalism really works and about how you get how it's important to get these multiple perspectives. So I felt at that point I'd kind of grown up a little bit from just doing uh, reviews of albums and stuff like that. So it was a kind of a pivotal moment for me.
Absolutely. It's very satisfying to see it in print as well afterwards, all the work you do. For the next question, this is specifically for Tony, I believe. Chris says, "Don't sell yourself short on giving advice for the next 100 years, Tony. You were the closest to year one compared to the rest of the panel."
Yeah, it just means I'm the oldest person here, and I don't know what year 100 years ago. Yeah, I guess so. I'm about almost halfway in between there. It's dreadful to think about. I'm not sure it gives me any more perspective though. So thanks, Chris.
Sydney asks, further to Bryn's social media question and coming from the flip phone board era, phone photography wasn't as pervasive as it is now. How is the cord navigating modern photojournalism with everybody with a phone can take and share a photo instantly? Does anyone have any opinions on like how like phones are used for journalism now?
I can give a perspective from like both the last couple of years at I almost said the Globe, the Cord, but also kind of what it is like now in professional media. But Clara, I'd also be curious if you have thoughts on this. But in 2016, 17, like that part right at the end, we were starting to use phones. I remember there were times like some people would cover fires and they would take photos of it, or if they had their phone and they would take some video. I did some video during that bomb threat and whatnot, but it wasn't necessarily this like big thing. It was still, let's try to do it mostly through DSLRs or whatever. But some interviews were starting to happen. Now in the creator world, it feels like it's the predominant way of doing the majority of journalism. And so that's what I'm curious, like how the court will incorporate it going forward. I will say I know that you guys just moved and brought all of your DSLRs with you. But I'm curious, Claire, if you have any thoughts of like how you think it fits in.
Sure. I think obviously phones are like to some degree important in journalism as it really gets you on the ground and it's for like a lot of I'm sure like we have used like when St. Patrick's Day happened we posted a video like that somebody had just taken from their phone while they were in like the huge party that happens on that one street. So I think it's important but obviously like for actual print and like actual media we prefer to use like photos that were taken and like obviously we really appreciate all our photographers who actually come with that skill set and like want to like still take photos and things. Obviously I think that like both things can be true at the same time that like phones aren't like a bad thing to have in journalism, but also like that cameras and like getting high quality photos for journalism are just as important. If anyone else has anything they'd like to add at all. Sylvia asks again, putting a newspaper to bed can evoke a variety of feelings, relief, anxiety, dread, happiness. How did it feel to submit the final edition during your term? Did you do anything to celebrate?
Yes, we had a huge party. The biggest party of the year would be after the last edition of the paper for the semester for the year was done, and it would be like ridiculous. It was like out of hand, that type of party.
Yeah, so the feeling wise, it's real always really sad because it was like this weird feeling of like I took a year off to be the editor in chief for 2015 to 16, so it was like this unofficial, oh my God, I'm gonna be an adult now. Like I have to be an adult. I have to move on. I was also moving to Toronto like 3 weeks later, which was
Mhm.
terrifying in its own. But that night was the all-nighter, and we stayed up all night. And I very much remember covering a couple people in newspapers as they fell asleep on the couch, and we ordered our food and whatnot. But it's always that moment of like bittersweetness because you have such a great team, and like Kaitlyn said, like you'd have these moments where it was either you're getting out at 11 or you're getting out at 3, 4 in the morning, and so for that one to be like dedicated, you're staying up all night the last time you get to do this, and especially when it was my last, like I 100% went home and cried. 100%.
It's a very emotional moment.
I was just curious that in my day, the very last paper of the year was a joke issue. Is that still done? No.
I don't think we did it last year, but we certainly have joke editions still, 100%.
Oh, you do? Okay. Yeah. So the last issue has a certain feel to it where everyone's just trying to come up with some stupid stuff. And the fun of it really is, at least for me, it was imitating another newspaper. We did a parody of the Globe and Mail, and so everything has a kind of a one-to-one correspondence. So it's a lot of fun to try and figure out how might we make that a little silly. Often some of the jokes were just not worthy of print, and so you do your best. And then of course there was a great big party after. Um, Not right after, of course, because it's like 6 o'clock in the morning, but a couple of days later. And it was memorable at the time. But yeah, you do get that sense of relief and sadness when it's all over for sure. And I similarly to what Shelby was saying, uh, I took a year off too. So I'd already graduated, and then I had this year off doing the paper, and then I had to think about what to do next. And I actually took a couple of years before I figured out what I was going to do. But uh, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely. Amanda, would you like to say anything before we go forward?
I just wanted to comment on the joke issue. In the archives, we have to be very clear when people are looking at the joke issues because some people take those issues as being serious. And so that just when you mentioned the joke issue, that's something that we've had to deal with in the archives when folks are referencing past issues of the court.
I remember even in our day, some people like there would be controversy around the joke issue because it was just like serious enough that there were often people who would think it was serious. And then there would be someone in administration who would come to us and talk to us about these joke issues. So I think for a while they might have been paused
Hmm.
because of some controversy or something, but I'm not fully clear on the details.
And it must be harder to do them now. Like you're thinking about the current state of the world and so on. Satire is difficult because it's just too close to reality. So I'd find it much harder to do now than it would be in our day.
Absolutely. Would anyone else like to answer the question of like their last edition before I move to the last Q&A question? Perfect. Bryn asks, if working for the Cord was worth actual academic credits towards like a degree at Laurier, which faculty/program would it belong to?
Got to be religion. To me, we were devout believers in the Cord, and I think it's a religion. That's a religious studies. Yeah.
Anyone else like to say their piece? All right, perfect. Well, then I believe that's everything for the Q&A. I'll pass it back to Amanda to finish us off for the evening. Thank you guys so much for answering all the questions, and I really appreciate all your responses.
Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing their stories and their insights with us. Thank you so much to Clara for moderating this event. We really appreciate having a student reporter perspective with us today. And I also want to thank Curtis from the Cord, without whom this event would not have been possible. And I just want to make a small plug. The Cord is planning a celebration during homecoming in September this year to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the student newspaper. So be on the lookout for more information shortly for that event. So thank you so much for everyone for participating, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.